Welcome to Startup Happy Hour, sponsored by Content Allies. Grab a drink and join us to hear fun and inspirational stories from startup founders and visionaries who are making a positive impact in our communities, and learn how you, too, can turn your new and exciting ideas into reality. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Startup Happy Hour. I'm Diana Chen, your host, and I'm here today with Arthur Shi. Arthur is a software engineer at Snowflake, a cloud data platform company that just had an extremely successful IPO last fall. Welcome, Arthur.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for being here. So to start off, I know Snowflake's been all over the news lately, or at least in the last few months, since you guys IPO'd back in the fall of 2020. So why don't you start by just telling us a little bit more about Snowflake and what the company's all about?
Sure. So at Snowflake, we say we're building a cloud data platform, and the goal there really is to democratize data and make it possible for organizations of all kinds to bring data-driven decisions into their processes. So what that kind of means is where we started was in an area called data warehousing, which is basically using a database for more analytics type of workloads. So you have really large data sets, large volume of data, and you want to extract insights from that data and take actions based on it. There are a bunch of problems with traditional data warehouses that don't translate well to the cloud, don't really fully make use of resources in the cloud to the best of what they're capable of. And from there, we are kind of starting to get into other applications, other use cases. So we want to support things like data science, machine learning, data visualization, and start to get more toward the real-time and predictive use cases, in addition to the more ad hoc stuff we kind of started with. And we also do stuff now around data sharing. So when you have teams within a company or even across organizations who could benefit from sharing data with each other and having a real-time kind of single source of truth for the data they use to make decisions, that's extremely valuable. And in the past, there's a lot of expensive data copying going back and forth. You have different versions of the data that get out of sync, and so people are no longer on the same page. Things like that. So what we really want to do is build a platform where pretty much anything you want to do with data, you can do it more performantly, more cheaply, and in a more shareable way through Snowflake.
Awesome. So I want to dig a little deeper into the cloud data part. Can you talk a little bit more about how most companies are using cloud data right now, and sort of like what is the gap, what they're missing, like where cloud data can be used that people aren't really using it yet?
Yeah, so I think what we've seen, especially over the past year with the COVID pandemic, and there's been a big move to the cloud where companies are increasingly starting to feel that managing their own hardware on premises, which is historically the way things have been done, is very painful and requires a lot of expertise that organizations aren't always equipped with. So in the past, for example, if you want to run a on-premises data warehouse application, you need roles like database administrators, you need a lot of IT support, and you may even need to spend a lot of time with your software engineers, for example, making sure that that's working well for you. But with the cloud, what you can do is you have a company that's really good at managing all those things for you. They automate a lot of the process. They can remove a lot of the tuning knobs that are required to get good performance out of it. And it's all handled offsite. So you don't even need to, buy computers, buy licenses, things like that. So it really just makes things a lot more convenient, and it makes it a lot easier to get good results.
Got it. And then can you talk a little bit more about some of the more interesting use cases that you've seen or that you've done in your work, or that you think could be applied to companies down the line?
Yeah, I don't work specifically on this, but this is something that we're doing now, and I think it's really exciting, which is kind of the data sharing side of things. So for example, there's a health data company called Star Schema, and they had a data set that they were managing and listing on the Snowflake Data Exchange, all about COVID-19 cases, new outbreaks, how many cases were coming from different places. And they made that public to use to all Snowflake customers. So you can simply go online, access that data. And what you can immediately start doing is using that star schema COVID data to enrich your own data sets. So now you have all sorts of applications possible where things like, if you're a retailer, for example, you might see how local and regional changes in COVID cases interact with other variables, such as marketing campaigns or different promotions you're running, and seeing how those affect different products. Or if you are some kind of healthcare provider or insurance provider, you can see how these data interact with other data you have on what your customers are doing and what your customers' needs are. So across the board, we think that having this ecosystem where people can basically say, hey, I have this data, you can get it easily and do whatever you want with it and improve the outcomes for your own customers, whatever industry you're in. I think that's super powerful. So that's one thing that's going on that's really relevant. And, there are other interesting things, for example, that I just never considered as data problems. So we have a customer, for example, who is one of the major pizza chain players. And they were talking about how, during the Super Bowl, you have this event where kind of everyone online, they call it like the Black Friday for pizza, for example, where you have this span of a couple hours where like millions or even tens of millions of pizzas get delivered nationwide. It's like there's no difference in time zone. Like everyone in the country is doing it at the same time. And fundamentally, that's a data problem. Like, how do you know, like, how are the supply chains going to be ready? What kind of prep do you need to do on the delivery side? How do you kind of forecast, like, these kinds of customers have these preferred products, and how do you make sure they all get it in a timely manner during a special event like that? So even something as fun and that doesn't sound really like a tech problem can benefit from data. And that's something that we're seeing our customers do.
Yeah, for sure. And then even tying that back to sort of like the COVID pandemic, talking about something that's really relevant today is all the supply chain issues that we saw with the pandemic of people not having toilet paper and not having basic supplies and things like that. So you're basically saying that these are all at the core data problems that can be solved if people just paid more attention to the data and took action based on the data that they found. Is that right?
To some extent, yeah. I think, with something like a pandemic suddenly appearing, like there are unexpected things where no amount of historical data can necessarily inform you that, hey, a pandemic's about to start. But once those trends do start appearing, yeah, I think that data can make a big difference. And I mean, one of the big things is now everybody knows that data is important and data is valuable. But just because you have tons of data lying around doesn't mean you have actionable insights. You need to actually be able to process that data and identify what you're looking for and have the tools that actually can deliver those insights on time for you to make a difference. For example, even if you have the data and you know what you're looking for, if it takes you a week to get an answer from that data and you need that answer today, it's not helpful. So really transforming data into insights across the board for all kinds of organizations is kind of what we're trying to enable.
Yeah. And so what you do at Snowflake, is it when you work with companies, for instance, they come to you with their data, and then do they typically have a goal that they're trying to reach or an insight that they're trying to extract from the data? Or does anybody come to you with a whole chunk of data and they just say, hey, I've got all this data, but I have no idea what to do with it and how this can be useful for me. Can you help me?
I would say that our customers are more in the former category. They have, for example, data scientists or data related roles internally where they say, hey, we know we're gathering data on all of these things, and we know what kind of business problems or organizational problems we may be trying to solve with it, but we just don't have the tooling that allows us to do it. We're kind of more serving that side of the market. We're not really like a consultancy where we tell people, hey, we think you can use your data like this, or we think that you should start collecting this kind of data. I think there has been enough of a movement already where people are starting to realize that a data strategy is fundamentally important to be competitive in today's market. And what we want to do is basically provide the infrastructure for them to use that in whatever way they see fit.
Yeah. And so I guess like when you think to the future, what are some ways in which you can see cloud data being used in, say 10 or 20 years from now? Like, where do you see this technology being in the future?
That's a really interesting question. And I'm not sure if I can think of really specific things that I think will happen, but in general, I think that the kinds of problems that we'll be able to solve when the just getting the data in order isn't as much of a challenge as that is today. Like, I think that's going to make a massive difference. If you think about the difference, for example, in what people are doing with data today versus say 30 years ago, there's a huge difference. Like in the 80s, we already kind of had these relational database systems. SQL was already invented, which is still today like basically one of the most prevalent data tools. But back then, what you would have again is it was all on-premises stuff. You would buy a license, and for example, you'd pay Oracle and say, "I'm going to use your database product. I'm going to buy X number of licenses to run on our own computers, and if we barely use it, too bad. Like we already paid for it. If we need more than we bought, like okay, now we have to buy more licenses, or we have to buy more hardware, or both." And then we have to kind of make sure that everything's up and running versus today where you have data warehousing applications in the cloud. And obviously I'm biased and I think Snowflake has the best product, but we do have competitors who are offering a similar product. And now it's more like a consumption model. You think of utilities, like if you use more electricity or you use water, like you can always turn on the tap, you can always use what you need, and you just pay for what you use rather than trying to predict ahead of time, like I need exactly this much this month. It removes a lot of that kind of exercise from the pricing model. So things are just way more flexible now, one, and two, the scale is way bigger. Like the amount of data that people were collecting and trying to analyze 30 years ago when we got the first relational database systems. I mean, you might have data sets in the scale of gigabytes, and people back then thought that was pretty big. But now we see customers who have single tables that are a petabyte or more in size, uncompressed. And so just trying to run the same query on 5 or 10 gigabytes versus the same query on a table that's a petabyte in size is a huge difference. Like if you're just using old technology, sitting around waiting, we have customers who literally on other technologies would take a week to get an answer from some query, and then on Snowflake it's like less than an hour. So there's really a transformational difference in speed. And so I think in the future, things will continue to get faster, things will continue to be more flexible, and we'll have this ecosystem where organizations work together and solve problems with each other's data. So I'm not sure exactly what will happen, but I think that the impact is going to be really large.
Do you envision there being a next iteration of the cloud? So like maybe 20 years ago, if you told somebody about the cloud, they wouldn't even understand what that means. Like, do you see a future iteration of something else that's sort of like a cloud 2.0?
Yeah, there could be. I mean, I guess one of the things that people are doing now is trying to see how quantum computing can be applied. And I'm wondering if like quantum computing will be available as a cloud resource in the future, and what kind of problems we'll be able to solve with that we can't solve today. I think machine learning is an example of a technology that people are super excited about, but I think it's still an immature technology in the sense that while everyone's hyped up about it and there are tons of problems we want to try to throw machine learning at, I think we're still in the process of figuring out how to do that and what kind of problems are best for that. So I don't know if the cloud will fundamentally change in the future. If I knew what the next big thing would be, like I would leave and start my own company, I guess. But I think what we'll be able to use it. So fundamentally, I would describe the cloud as you're using somebody else's computers, and that gives you the freedom to pretend there's no limits on how much power you need. There's no limits on like when you can do things and stuff like that. So yeah, I think as we get more innovative with the kinds of applications we can run on the cloud, the type of problems we can solve will correspondingly become more complex and exciting.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of, predicting the next big thing and going off on your own, is that something that you see yourself doing one day, is becoming the founder of a startup?
I'm not sure. I kind of doubt it, to be honest. So in college, I was pretty interested in entrepreneurship, and I was really plugged into the local startup scene in Ann Arbor. So I went to school at Michigan. And my feeling is that I find it really exciting to be in that environment. And I think the best thing about it is um, the people who are attracted to early stage businesses are usually really innovative people. They have a lot of positive energy. They're always looking to help each other out and get everyone networked with each other and say, hey, I know you're trying to solve this problem and I'm trying to solve this problem. Maybe we can help each other out. Or I know somebody who can help you out with this. Do you know somebody who can help me out with my problem? So like that whole environment is super exciting. And that's the main thing. If I would become like a founder or join another early stage company, that's what I would be looking forward to the most. But at the same time, I think finding a really good problem to solve and to start a business around is hard. So the only way I can see myself doing that is if there's a really specific market or a really specific problem that I start realizing that people have that I feel I'm kind of in a uniquely good position to tackle, then I might pursue it a little bit. But I don't think I would start something just for the sake of it, because I think the amount of hard work it takes and the amount of risk that's involved for me personally isn't really worth it unless I really felt I was onto something. But you never know. I'll never say never, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a very honest answer. It's a very honest take, and I appreciate that. I think a lot of people, who maybe haven't touched the startup world as much as you have in the past are a little disillusioned by it, and just think about, like the fun and sexy parts of it, and don't think about actually how much hard work goes into it. So it sounds like you definitely enjoy being a software engineer. And for people listening, because I think you're actually the first software engineer that we've had on the podcast, talk a little bit more about what does the day-to-day look like for a software engineer at a startup company?
Sure. I mean, I guess we're not really a startup anymore, but we're scaling up very quickly. So we're growing quickly. And I guess that's kind of a phase that startups will hopefully eventually hit. So I would say day to day, I mean, my primary responsibility is building and maintaining software, of course. And the area I'm kind of focused on is the stability and scalability of our service. Basically, what that means is we have a lot of users who are trying to use Snowflake at the same time. And if tons of people are all trying to do a lot of work on our platform all at once, how do we make sure that we stay online 24/7? How do we make sure we don't crash when the load gets really high? And how do we make sure that we're giving our customers the resources they need to get the performance they expect? It's a simple problem at a high level, and just the bigger it gets, the harder and harder it gets to deliver on that. So I would say that my typical day, I have a couple of weekly meetings, but that's definitely a minority of the time. Most of the time, I'm going to be spending either writing code. Hopefully, that's what I want to be doing instead of being stuck in unnecessary meetings and things like that. I might be discussing designs with my teammates, or taking a look at ongoing problems. So I think one of the big misconceptions about software engineering is that it's all about writing code. And ultimately, that's what we do to build features, fix bugs, and things like that. But a lot of software engineering is actually like detective work. Like no matter how high quality the code you write is or the code your teammates write is, there's always going to be bugs and unexpected problems that come up. And those will sometimes be very complicated or very subtle interactions that cause those problems. And ultimately, those problems are things that may prevent your customers from doing what you promised them they could do. So a lot of times you're going to be spending time trying to figure out, why did this thing go wrong? How can we make sure it doesn't happen anymore? And if something like this does start happening again, ideally, how can we have the system kind of get itself back into a good state on its own? Or how can it let us know that, hey, something's wrong, we need you to come take a look?
Yeah. And how much of your time would you say is spent on working on like planned projects versus working on putting out fires, like unexpected things that come up?
Yeah, it totally varies. when things are good, maybe spend like 15 to 20% on unexpected things that come up. But every now and then you have those weeks where it just seems like everything is catching fire, and you just really have to kind of pull yourself away from whatever you were doing before and just make sure things get stable again. Um, so I would say it's pretty variable, honestly. And it also depends on what kind of team you work on. Some teams are really more along the lines of when things break, we are kind of in the first line of response. And some teams are a little more like focused on features that maybe are more internal and don't have as much direct customer impact. So I would say it depends.
Got it. Another thing that I find very interesting is one thing that obviously everybody should be prepared for when they work in a startup is that the startup can grow very rapidly. And that's something that you've experienced at Snowflake over the past year as you guys have grown very quickly and gone through an IPO. So can you talk a little bit more about that process? Like, what was it like being an employee at a startup that experienced such large growth and even to the extent of going through an IPO?
Yeah, that is really interesting. So when I started at Snowflake about a year and a half ago now, maybe a little more than that, our team was like about 10 people, and now it's like 30 people. So that's a huge change to go through in a relatively short amount of time. The interesting things I think are along the lines of like, where are the friction points and what do you try to do to fix them? And in the end, I kind of think of that kind of organizational problem as an information sharing problem. So by that, I mean the senior members who have been on the team for a while and the leadership team, for example, they know a lot about how the company works and how the things that their teams are responsible for work. And when you bring in new employees, you kind of have this phase where the new employees are in this ramping up learning mode. They don't know all of these things yet. And it puts a lot of load on the existing team to, one, help them onboard, and two, just like the longer you've been there, the more things you own. And so more people are coming to you for help with various things. I think the biggest challenge that we experienced and maybe continue to experience is, how do you build processes in a way where new employees can be efficient with starting to contribute and just get in their own flow as quickly as possible, and balancing that against the overhead it takes to, document everything, build and test out these new best practices and new processes. If we just constantly spent all of our time working in the best organizational practices, we would never have the time to actually go and build the technology that we're trying to build. So there's this constant juggling act you have to manage. And when you're going at the speed that we've been growing, that's pretty tough.
Yeah. So for anybody listening who's part of a startup that is experiencing that sort of rapid growth, what's your best advice for them during this period of rapid growth? Things that they can be doing in their job, or, whether it's just mindset shifts that they should have, like have more patience or things like that. Like, what are some of your best tips for people in that position?
Yeah, I think one is that the feeling of working at the company is going to change, and it's going to start to become a little more corporate, and that's inevitable. Especially the employees who were there a little bit before I was, kind of reminisce about, the old days when it was such a small company and you knew everyone in the company. At some point, if you are really successful and you guys are working on a problem that a lot of people want to see solved, that's going to have to change. But what I think that doesn't mean is like, you shouldn't just give up your culture. You should try to keep the values that the company has had, and you should try to be as helpful as possible. Like, there's going to be a lot of people coming in and who may be asking you for help with things, maybe asking you to teach them things. And I think mindset wise, it's best to see yourself as someone helpful who can make a difference for new team members and be someone who's enjoyable to work with, rather than viewing that as a distraction or something that's annoying, even though sometimes you will feel like that. Like, at the end of the day, I think it's important to continue to foster the team environment even as the team gets bigger. That's really critical. And I think you just have to stay open-minded. Like, things are going to change, but at the end of the day, if you trust your leadership, they're going to try to do the best they can. And then at the end of the day after that, it's just on you. Like you have to take ownership and be the best teammate you can, do the best work you can, try to lift others up. And it'll be busy sometimes in the scaling up periods. And that's part of the fun. And that's also part of the stress.
For sure. I think that's all really good advice. For you personally, do you enjoy, I guess, which phase of a startup do you most enjoy? And I'm talking about like even going back to your past experience at Facebook previously, which is obviously a much different setting than a 30-person startup company. Which phase do you personally enjoy the most and why?
I had previously done an internship with a really small local startup in Ann Arbor, and there were basically 3 employees plus me. That was really fun. I think that was kind of in the starting to catch product market fit and starting to catch traction phase, but obviously at a very small scale. And it was kind of the type of market where even if that company succeeds, it's not going to be a multi-billion-dollar company. It's just not that big of a market. But I think that was a lot of fun. There's a lot of ideation. It was super, super easy to just be like, nobody has the answers. Everybody has to wear many hats and basically everyone does everything. I think that was super fun because a lot of the innovation in terms of, hey, how do we want to build our own team and build our own product and directions we want to take, like the amount of impact you have at that stage of a company is a lot of fun. It's a lot of brainstorming and just being iterative, testing things out, seeing what sticks and what doesn't. I honestly think that was the most fun. In terms of when I later worked with Facebook and now working at Snowflake, these really huge tech companies, it's more so like, what's the scale of the problems we're solving? It's way bigger. And there are certain trade-offs you made in the organization to go after that. So if I just wanted to have a fun time and just do really interesting work with like great people, I would go for something really small. And if I wanted to work on like a really challenging technology, I think a somewhat bigger company is in some ways better for that.
Got it. So I know you're not too far into your career, but looking back to the path that you took to get here, and thinking about, maybe yourself 5 years ago, what is the best advice that you would give to, say, a college or even a high school student that wants to be a software engineer at a tech startup company one day?
Yeah, looking back, I think I'm really glad that I did a lot of the things that I did. And the 2 main categories I would say those fall into are 1, focus on your skills, like try to do well in class. I know that this is kind of a hot topic in itself, like how much does education line up with work? But at the end of the day, if you're studying something like computer science, which I highly recommend if you want to become a software engineer, you're developing foundational skills. Pay attention to those. Those are important. It's kind of like a learning how to learn thing. If you have strong foundations, it's much easier to learn things on your own or from others in the future. And the other side of that is just get plugged in with the local ecosystem. Try to get a little bit of entrepreneurial exposure. And that doesn't only mean with startups and with founders and things like that. Anywhere you see like students or people in general taking initiative, starting their own projects, just like trying to get something off the ground and, talking to whoever they need to talk to make that work, like follow that energy and try to learn from it. I think there's a lot of creative and positive energy that kind of happens in those kind of communities. And what that really taught me to do is look for opportunities and go after them. Like if you kind of just wait around and try to go like the standard route, whatever that means, I don't even necessarily think there is one. But a lot of people, for example, who want to enter tech say, oh, get a computer science degree, try to get a good grades, try to get an internship, and then like apply to a big company. That's like a very common route that a lot of my classmates took. But there are opportunities all over the place that aren't just big companies and like good grades, and trying to learn from all of those opportunities and see what excites you the most and just like trust your gut feeling and go after it. I think you learn so much more and in such a more genuine way by doing that. So I would definitely advise that.
I love that. And I don't know, I know you don't have personal experience with this, but I don't know if you have worked with people, at Snowflake or at Facebook or some of the other companies that you've worked at. But for people listening to this who don't come from a technical background, like say they didn't study computer science in college, but now they want to get into that and they want to learn how to code. They want to become a software engineer at a startup. Do you have any advice for them there?
Yeah, you definitely don't need a computer science degree to become a software engineer. I think it's just something that is helpful if you have the resources to do that. Obviously, school is expensive and going back for a degree isn't always practical. There are a lot of free online resources that can teach you how to code. There are a lot of boot camps and online classes, things like that, that people do. So I would say the first thing I would recommend is try to understand what kind of technology you're interested in working on. It's a really different skill set to build websites than it is to work in the back end of like a large scale distributed system where users aren't connecting to it directly, but it's powering something that maybe users interact with. So depending on what kind of problems sound interesting to you, you should do some research and find out what kind of skills go into those. What are, for example, common programming languages that people use there? And what kind of information do you need to know about? For example, how close do you want to be to the hardware, or do you not want to really think about hardware at all? Like there are some fields of computer science that are much more conscious about what's going on the metal, whereas others don't worry about it so much. So I think if you can go from like a vague idea of I would like to be a software engineer to something more specific, like this kind of technology or this kind of application seems really exciting, and then start to learn about what skills it would take to work on that, I think that's a productive way to get started.
I think that's really good advice that I wish I would have gotten before I went through a coding boot camp, which I don't regret at all. I'm really glad I did it just because I'm at a tech company now, and I'm glad that I have some sort of, base knowledge, even if I can't actually code stuff anymore. But I think like that it would have been really helpful for me to have gotten that advice that you just said and actually thought about like what it is I wanted to do with having that coding experience and skill set before I just went and dove into a coding boot camp and sort of relied on the program to tell me what language I was going to learn and things like that. So I like that a lot. Thank you. So Arthur, outside of work and coding and things like that, tell people a little bit more about who you are as a person. What are some of your hobbies? What do you like to do in your free time?
Yeah, for sure. I have a lot of hobbies. I would kind of describe myself as a hobby collector, where like I might find out about something new and get really, really into it for a few months, and then like maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't. Like I've done that by now with a lot of things, but in general, I'm really into music. I grew up playing piano and sometimes still do that. I've messed around a little bit with trying to like mix some music using computer software and stuff like that. So I've been doing that. In general, I'm pretty into strategy games. Like I grew up playing a lot of video games. Lately, I've been playing Go, which is kind of like this ancient Chinese board game that people still play today. And that's a strategy game that one of my friends got me into, and it's super hard, but super interesting. I like running. I moved to San Francisco. Right now I'm actually at home in Michigan with my parents, but I live in San Francisco most of the time, and it's like a beautiful city for running. And then, yeah, I just like learning about random stuff when I have the time or drive to do so. Like I think history and economics are super interesting. So like, for example, I just love watching YouTube videos where people just explain some stuff in an easy to understand way. It's like a good way to learn something and feel at least kind of productive, just like sitting around on the couch watching YouTube videos. So yeah, those are a couple of my hobbies.
That's awesome. So I have to ask, what are some of the most random or weird things that you've gotten really obsessed with, and maybe they haven't stuck, but that you like got really obsessed with for a short period of time?
Oh man. One is maybe like poker, for example. I remember like I learned how to play poker from my friends in high school, and then I thought it was really fun, and I was like, is there strategy in this game? Like, can I beat these guys more? Like, I'm pretty competitive about games. So if I think it's fun, the next question I'm going to ask is like, how do I get good? And I'll usually try to learn that until it gets hard. And then I kind of give up a lot of the times. But poker is an interesting one, which I actually think I learned a lot of useful things from, which is basically like managing risk and like kind of taking calculated risks. Because obviously at the end of the day, it's kind of like a gambling game, but there are things you can do to improve your odds, which kind of as a theme in life, like you can do the right things, but sometimes things just won't work out. And thinking more about making good decisions than basing your feelings on the outcomes solely, I think is one of the interesting things I learned. I was really into that for a brief period of time. With music, I got really interested in like the audio engineering side of things for a little bit. So learning all about like what is sound and how does it work, and like how do different kinds of devices process that. So I love electronic music, and like technology around electronic instruments is super interesting. So just learning like how do these things actually work is another one. So I was just like really absorbed in kind of like the nerdy side of what is this and what is it doing, and I kind of lost sight of just like loosen up a little, be creative, have some fun with it, and don't worry so much about that stuff. Like it really depends on both, right? So like trying to be a bit of a musician but also just being like a nerd at heart, that was like something I was really into. Yeah, those are two examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely fits in with, your job, like what you do day in and day out, engineering. You just like to take things apart and figure out where things came from and how things work together and things like that. So that makes perfect sense to me.
I think learning how, understanding how things work and just like having that light bulb moment where you get it, like it's a really good feeling. So I think that's kind of why I got into engineering and some of the hobbies that I did.
Yeah. Are you a big podcast listener? I'm just thinking about, there's like a few podcasts I listen to that are sort of like that. One of them is Stuff You Should Know. There's How I Built This, which is more like founder stories, but Stuff You Should Know is a good one. What else? There's something else that they basically they talk about like very common topics, but they dive deep into like how it actually works. And that's something that like people don't really think about because they just think, oh, it's like such a normal thing that happens in life. But they like really dive deep. And I like that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, I might have to check that out. I used to listen to podcasts while commuting. So now everything's work from home and I don't really have, I guess, the podcast time that I used to have. But one day maybe the office will open and I'll have to commute again. And I think I would start listening to podcasts again more.
Yeah, or you can listen on your runs. I like listening to podcasts when I run.
Oh, yeah.
I used to be a music listener, but now I found that I actually enjoy listening to podcasts or audiobooks more when I run for some reason. Like it keeps my mind off of the running aspect and keeps me distracted, so I run longer.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'll have to try that out. I don't think I've actually ever listened to podcasts while running. I actually used to listen to music a lot running too, and now I kind of more just like don't listen to anything. And the reason for that is I feel like I'm so plugged in all the time, like doing my work, and a lot of times I listen to music when I'm working, and music is such a big hobby for me anyway that I feel like I'm like listening to music all the time. Just having things quiet and like just listening, not necessarily quiet depending on where you are, but just listening to the outside world and like removing yourself from all that stuff for like 30 minutes a day or an hour a day, I actually find it feels really good.
That's a really good point. I really like that. And I don't typically run without music or podcasts, but I did run the only half marathon I've ever done. I did that without listening to anything. And I actually really enjoyed that. But that was also in Bermuda, like along the beach. And so I had really nice views and things to distract me while I was running, so I didn't feel like I was bored or missing anything.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. I did a half marathon for the first time earlier this year. And that was in San Francisco. And I also wasn't listening to music. It was just like kind of running around the city, seeing stuff, being close to the water. I ran out on the Golden Gate Bridge and everything. So that was pretty fun.
That is super awesome. San Francisco it seems like one of the hardest cities to run in because it's all hills, right? I mean, I'm from Chicago and, being from the Midwest, like I'm so used to everything being so flat that even the thought of running in San Francisco is like so intimidating to me.
Yeah, I'm from Michigan as well, so super flat here. I would say San Francisco, I mean, it depends what neighborhoods you run through, and you can kind of take a route that minimizes the hills, but you will encounter them. Um, what I like about running in San Francisco is it never gets too hot and it never gets too cold. Like the temperature is always in a comfortable range for running. And with the hills, I mean, I just take it super slow. And I mean, in general, with running, I'm not a really fast runner, so I just take it slow and try to. I remember I used to hate running, and then someone told me like, if you run slower, it hurts less, and I was like, whoa, that's a light bulb moment. So I just slowed it way down and just tried to run for longer and just like be able to look around me more and like feel more comfortable, and that was a big game changer. So I stay off the hills for the most part and just enjoy the weather.
That's awesome. I love it. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do, Arthur, if you're up for it, is a get to know Arthur game. And this is just like a fun little thing. I've got a bunch of random creative questions lined up here. And if you're up for it, I'd love to go through that and, give people a little more insight into the way that you think and kind of like who Arthur is behind the scenes.
Yeah, let's do it. Sounds fun.
Okay, cool. So the first question is, if you were stranded on a desert island with only one other person, who would you want that person to be? And this can be someone who's dead or alive.
That's a really good question. I'm going to go with a practical answer and say like Bear Grylls or some kind of like survival person, just because I would just die on my own. So first things first, I would need someone to help me make it out there. But let's assume I can like take care of myself. I don't know who would be really interesting to be there with. I don't know. I feel like I would want to get some kind of like meditation teacher or like a spiritual figure and just like make peace with the fact that this is my life now and like it's all going to be okay. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think your first answers, I think those are both good answers. My answer would be like more in line with your second answer. Like I'm just going to accept the fact that I'm probably going to die. And so I would rather have somebody with me who can provide some good entertainment. So at least I can die happy.
Yeah. I would want like a really, maybe like a rowdy meditation teacher, like someone who's like a joker too at the same time, because you got to pass the time somehow.
Yeah, right. Okay, next one. If you could be any animal, what animal would you be?
Ooh. I think a bird of some kind or like a fish. And I think like in my dreams a lot, I feel like I have like flying dreams, and I feel like just being able to fly around and see the landscape and go wherever you want and feel super free would be amazing. And I also spent a lot of time growing up swimming on like swim teams and racing and stuff like that. So I think just actually having naturally the feel for the water and being to explore like the oceans and stuff like that would be super fun as well.
Yeah. Have you ever scuba dived?
No, I really want to.
That's probably the closest you'll get to actually being a fish.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I would definitely like to go see like some coral reefs or something like that.
Yeah. All right. If you could live anywhere other than where you live now, which I know it sounds like you really like San Francisco, but if you could live anywhere in the world other than San Francisco, where would you live?
I would want to be somewhere mountainous, I think. I really enjoy hiking, and I think going and like walking around in the mountains and finding a beautiful view either alone or with like a friend or two is like really amazing. I feel like it just clears my mind and I feel so much more like peaceful doing stuff like that. I also really like the deserts. I got a car last year and I kind of went on a road trip around the Southwest a little bit. I went to pass through Vegas, passed through the Mojave Desert, and like went around like southern Utah a little bit. And something about like the desert environment is just so cool to me. And I think living close to that would also be awesome.
Yeah, that's a cool area. I like how they have the mountains and the desert, so you kind of get,
Right.
a lot of things in one.
Exactly.
All right, if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would you want that to be?
Like one specific dish?
It could be a specific dish, or you could just say like a genre or a category of food.
I would say Korean
whatever comes
food.
to mind.
Yeah, I would say Korean food for sure. I think that the flavors are amazing. I love spicy food. I love the kind of like fermented and pickled flavors a lot. It's just like strong flavors, and most of it's pretty healthy. And as a daily food, like I think that would probably be the best for me.
Yeah, you could just eat banchan all day.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want to have?
Ooh, that's a good one. Honestly, I feel like I would want to go for something really subtle and inconspicuous. Like, I feel like if you start flying around and like shooting fireballs and stuff, like you're just not going to live a normal life anymore. Um, so maybe something like being able to slow time down and like other people can't feel it or notice that it's going on, but I can just like take my time and do stuff would be cool. I don't know, something like that.
That's super interesting. I don't think I've heard anyone say that. I really like that answer.
Yeah. Otherwise, if not that, maybe I would just choose to be like a musical prodigy or something and just like suddenly gain a bunch of skills out of nowhere. That would be fun too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, last one. If you could have any job other than the one that you have now and practical factors are not an issue, what job would you want to have?
I think about becoming a writer one day or maybe a teacher. I would really like to be able to do something where I actively like collect my thoughts on whatever variety of subjects, get them organized, figure out what I really think, how I really feel, and share that with others. That sounds really fulfilling to me. At the present moment, I don't really feel like I have anything that I want to say that badly or that I feel like just is dying to be said. So I'm not there yet, but I think one day that would be really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait to read your book that you come out with in X number of years.
Yeah, I'll let you know when it's out.
Please do. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for being here, Arthur. I really enjoyed this conversation. Appreciate you taking the time. Before you go, can you just tell people where they can find you if they'd like to chat with you more, and also where they can learn more about Snowflake?
Yeah, sure. If you want to find me, I guess the easiest thing to do would be find me on LinkedIn. My name is Arthur Shi, and I'm assuming that'll be written on the podcast somewhere. To find out more about Snowflake, I think just visit our website is probably the best thing you can do. We have a lot of content there about what is Snowflake and why Snowflake. If you really want to connect and are dying to know something, just you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about it there.
Awesome. And the Snowflake website is just snowflake.com, right?
Yep.
We will link everything in the show notes. Thank you again so much, Arthur, for being here. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And we will be back again soon with another episode of Startup Happy Hour.
Awesome. Thanks, Diana.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Startup Happy Hour, sponsored by Content Allies. If something we said today resonated with you, please share our episode on social media and sign up for our email list at startuphappyhourpodcast.com. Happy Hour doesn't have to end just because this episode is over. Continue the conversation with us at startuphappyhourpodcast.com or on Instagram at startuphappyhour.